Welcome to It's All Your Fault on True Story FM, the one and only podcast dedicated to helping you with the most challenging human interactions, those involving high conflict people. I'm Megan Hunter, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Eddy.
Hi, everybody.
We are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute and conflictinfluencer.com, where we focus on training, consulting, coaching, and educational programs and methods, all to do with high conflict. So welcome back, listeners. Thank you for listening while you're running on the treadmill today, which is something I should be doing. Today, we're talking about something that's incredibly common and deeply misunderstood. What happens when you're dealing with a truly high conflict person, but no one else sees it? Or they underestimate it, even if they see it as a little bit high conflict. This happens in the legal world, at work, in couples counseling, adult protective services, in groups, just really anywhere. You may be the client who walks into a lawyer's office or an employee who walks into the HR office already overwhelmed, trying to explain a pattern of behavior that really doesn't fit neatly into a box. Or a case or situation that should have been wrapped up months or years ago, and it's still churning because limits aren't being set by those who can set them, or maybe there's blind spots or even some conflict avoidance. Or maybe you're the professional sensing that something is off in the case dynamics, but struggling to articulate it in a way that courts or whatever landscape you're in will recognize or respond to it. High conflict personalities don't present as difficult in obvious ways, most generally. In fact, they can appear calm, persuasive, even credible, while the other person or party, often after months or years of escalation, starts to look emotional, reactive, or even unreasonable. It can be quite frustrating. And that is the trap, right? Because without a framework for understanding high conflict behavior, a system can unintentionally reward the very behaviors that are driving the conflict and penalize the person who is trying to respond to it. And we hear cases over and over in situations where a high conflict legal case ends up ruining someone financially, and they can't get anyone to understand it or listen, and the system seems designed to work against them. So today we're going to explore why that happens, how it shows up in real life, and what both clients and any professionals can do differently to recognize high conflict dynamics and address your approach before things spiral further out of control. So, Bill, I know that this is something that you've experienced quite a lot, probably in your consultation work, and because I know I hear it a lot, that just so much frustration over not getting people to understand what's going on. So why do high conflict people often come across as more credible than the person reacting to them? It's not all the time, but sometimes it happens.
Well, high conflict people generally have a lifetime of dealing with the effects of their personality. And they often don't really understand themselves, and they don't reflect on themselves. They're very used to seeing everybody else being at fault and themselves not responsible for things. And so they're experienced at blaming other people. I think of them as persuasive blamers, that they're really good at persuading other people that it's all your fault. Even if it's, you may have a tiny part in the situation, but it's not all your fault. And so you're dealing with, in a sense, a professional high conflict person. This doesn't start as adults. This gets started in childhood and may or may not include a personality disorder. And people with personality disorders are considered to be about 10% of adults, maybe even around the world, especially in more urbanized, modernized countries. So, on the one hand, high conflict people are good at this and good at looking good for a while. They can hold it together for a while. But then the other thing is that most high conflict behavior goes on in private. So, bullying, domestic violence, alienating children, spreading rumors about things people don't know what's true or what's not. I can't see what's happening inside that house. So it goes on in private. So people don't realize how much high conflict behavior there is because in public, people make themselves look good. So you have a public persona and a private personality. And that's where, like, you find out your neighbor was a serial killer, but they were so nice when they greeted you in the morning.
They didn't show up with an axe, I like to say.
That's right. So, there's these two sides. High conflict people very much have a public persona that they craft and try to make look good because they've experienced people turning against them because of their bad behavior, generally in private. And so they're skilled at that. So that's the one, they're skilled at that. But the other is society isn't really prepared because so much of this goes on in private. And so people have the belief that they understand how people work. And I thought that too until I really learned about high conflict people. There's this whole different, 10 to 15, 20% of people that operate differently. And as you say, Megan, and I like this term, is they have a different operating system. And it's like an alcoholic deals with alcohol differently from someone that occasionally drinks too much. It's a pattern of behavior. Well, high conflict people deal with conflict in a way that's different than most people. And you have to learn how to manage that. So society doesn't recognize it, and high conflict people are skilled at covering it up. So I think that's why people don't see it.
Yeah, and I've seen some cases where there's just kind of an aw shucks, good old boy or good old gal, when presenting to the public, but in private, just as high conflict as can be, or presenting on Facebook or other social media as just amazing human being and caring and concerned. But when it comes to relationships, real relationships and real conflict and decision making and problem solving, it's an entirely different pattern, as you say, Bill. So, what are the biggest mistakes that people make when trying to prove someone is high conflict, whether it's in court or the HR office? I have stepped on a couple of landmines on this one myself when I've tried to explain that, look, there's this pattern of high conflict behavior, even saying pattern and doing it in what I thought was the right way just made me look a little crazy, I think. And trying to explain to a professional that the people you're going to be interviewing have this pattern of high conflict behavior, and you really need to look for this, this, and this. So I'm probably being a little too bossy, which of course we all know is in my nature, but trying to get someone to see the light, remove the blind spot, and prove their high conflict. So where are these big mistakes?
This is what I've really focused on a lot the last few years is the mistakes are making it too complicated. And you have to communicate in simple terms because that's what high conflict people do. What's interesting is they use simple terms, they use emotional terms, and they repeat them a lot. And they're like bombard people with it. It's like, oh my goodness, this other person is, the most evil person in the world because the person in front of me is saying this over and over again. So what I find is you need to keep it simple. And I think to keep it simple, think of like three biggest concerns. Here's my three biggest concerns. And have a short phrase for each one that includes some emotion to it. So like in divorce cases, I'll say undermining father's parenting. And that's a very common theme. And undermining's not good. I mean, that has a sound to it. You keep saying, here's another example of undermining father's parenting.
As opposed to dad's a bad dad.
Right, Right. And that's what you're countering.
Or he has a personality disorder, or he's a high conflict person, or right?
Yeah, so that's what you're hearing is a label for a person, and it may be for you. I've been labeled bad things, but by saying undermining and saying behaviors, so you could say my concern is she's undermining father's parenting, and here's 3 examples. You give your 3 worst examples so you get an idea of how bad this is. Or physical abuse of mother, physical abuse of mother. On this day, he did this. On this day, he did that. On this day, he did that. So that you're hearing specific behaviors and you can picture them from what's being said. But here's another example of abusing mother or whatever term, but 3 or 4 words can stick. And I love it when I'm in court and the judge starts saying my 3 or 4 word concern. Well, it just seems to me like this is an example of misleading professionals. Ma'am, you've been misleading professionals. And I'm like, yes, they get it now. This is the pattern of behavior. Now, if I say pattern of behavior, some people push back, and I think you were suggesting that. So just saying, here's the behavior, here's examples of my concern. It's my biggest concern. And it often has to do with misrepresenting or lying, with undermining other people. And this could be in the workplace too. Things are disappearing from my desk. So-and-so said, don't be surprised if some of your things disappear because of how you've treated me. And you realize, uh-oh, they're telling me where they're headed. So wherever it is, keep it simple, like no more than like 3 key messages and examples, the worst examples under each of those. Don't worry about saying things in chronological order. That's a mistake a lot of lawyers make, I think, is they'll tell you the whole story, but the key point comes on page 7 in the middle. And that was right around when the reader, like the judge, started thinking about lunch.
Or a nap.
and missed it. So you need to get it out there right away. My biggest concerns are this, and here's 3 of the biggest examples.
I tend to think in terms of chronological order. So I think it is a trap that a lot of people do fall into. I really do like the describing the behaviors instead of saying pattern of behavior, or which you and I know it is a pattern of behavior, but it's not going to come off well. I think of, what are those commonalities that we see in high conflict situations? And it's often there's abuse happening in the background. Maybe it's child abuse or neglect. Maybe it's elder abuse. Very, very common, right?
More of that now. Yep.
Oh, so much more of it. And financial abuse, medical abuse. There's so many, many, many things that appear in these cases, and it can be difficult to get people to listen and understand. So if you can point out the behaviors, and or how about connecting, let's say potentially abusive situations to the standards or the state laws. Is, let's say, an adult protective services worker going to be offended if you say, well, here's the law and here's where it's not being met in this situation? How would you use that, Bill? And if so, how would you say it in a less, maybe a more nice way?
I've done that as a lawyer. I've pointed out the law to other lawyers, and you got to be careful you don't offend them. And so I'll say, I'm sure you know this, but I just thought I'd print it out. You have to sugarcoat things with professionals and friends who think they know everything, because it's like you may need their help, and yet there's something they don't know, but they don't know it. And that's the problem. And so what I'll say is either you probably know this, but I thought I'd just quote it, or you may not be aware of such and such. And then I'll say the information that I have. But I have to be real careful that I'm not challenging them, especially if I want their help in solving a case. Let's say it's the opposing lawyer, and I really think we got to keep this case out of court. It's not going to be good for either one of our clients. And we're probably going to look bad as lawyers if we're in court on this particular case. And so I think we should both try to accomplish such and such. And here's a piece of information you may not be aware of, blah, 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 blah. So I think that. I remember telling an opposing lawyer in a case, I said, I think within the next couple of weeks, your client's probably going to fire you. And so I just want to give you the heads up. Well, that's crazy, Bill. We got along fine. 2 weeks later, the client fires me. How did you know? Well, I get some things were said that I heard that person said to you that are warning signs to me of the end of a relationship. So I don't know. It's tricky, but you've got to try to help work with them. You can't lecture people that you want to get help from. That's one thing I've learned.
Yeah, and I guess disavow yourself from the notion that you're going to absolutely get your point across, because the high conflict personality isn't a known thing to a lot of people. Even if they've experienced it before, they don't understand it, and
They don't have words.
They don't have words, or they don't even think. There's some who don't think it's possible that people really do behave in this way. Oh, that's not happening. That he would never do that. She would never do that. I don't believe it. And then they go, and I'm thinking of a particular case, and I keep going back to Adult Protective Services with this, where, there was such a clear case of abuse in so many ways, but the manipulation of the adult protective service worker prevailed. Even though this is someone who's trained in abuse, they're still manipulated and probably were given a big question mark over their own head, thinking, this isn't possible. This isn't reality. People don't really behave this badly unless it's some major, major case you read about in the news. But the reality is this happens a lot, all the time. And it isn't always ending up in the news. These are everyday situations. So you're the person who's trying to relay information to a professional who has some power, some decision-making authority in some way, whether it's at work, at home, in school, or any situation. So in order to make yourself not appear crazy and blaming yourself, because that's often what happens. It gets completely turned around. And we should add law enforcement in there too, right? You're upset.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Right? You're upset. You're telling this big, long story, and it's like, that didn't really happen, or you sound a little hysterical. You need to pipe down, or you need to call this person or that person. So it can be really extraordinarily frustrating when you know what's really happened and what's going on. And you can't communicate that. You can't get someone to understand. Then you finally blow your lid. You finally get so frustrated, and then you kind of vent. And this is very common in high conflict. So, look, it's going to happen. Hopefully, if you listeners have done this before, you know exactly what it feels like is to have the regret after you've vented. We try not to do that. Find a more appropriate place. Don't send that email till the next day. You can have someone, you can biff it or talk to someone, get their feedback, because they're going to not have the same emotion that you do, and they're going to say, "Oh, you might want to slow your roll on this deal." Right. And okay, that's good advice. Now, if you have done the venting, can it be repaired, though?
We're not recommending that as a strategy.
No.
So you're saying if accidentally you've done the venting, go ahead.
Right. Accidentally, and it is a reality, because high conflict is the most frustrating thing that I think people deal with in life. So many people do finally, I guess the common responses will be overreacting, underreacting, just completely avoiding. There's lots of ways to handle it, but I think many people do eventually overreact. So can it be repaired if you do overreact? Let's say you've, vented to your attorney or to the HR department, and now you look a little cray cray. Can you go back and say, look, I was looking a little cray cray? Or is there some other way that can be handled?
Yeah. Well, if you don't think they're a high conflict person, let's say you yelled at your lawyer, say you're sorry. There's a place for apologies for I did something and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I got really upset. But if you think they're a high conflict person, we actually recommend against apologizing because then they turn that against you. What I find often in these situations with someone that's just not getting it is to say, I didn't believe it at first. I was really shocked to realize that this was a totally false statement. At first, I was really upset and thought this other person was acting badly. And then I realized, no, the person that's saying that is a persuasive blamer. There's someone really good at saying it's other people's fault when it's really their fault. And I was shocked. But let me tell you what the facts are that I learned that turned it around for me. And then say your examples, like if, she's actively undermining his relationship with the child, or another person's actively abusing her. So I think it helps to kind of agree with them that this sounds strange. And I've been able to say sometimes, I really didn't realize it at first either. So I share your skepticism. And here's the facts, or here's what I found out, or here's what the law says. And I think of a case of false allegations of child sexual abuse. And as a social worker, I've worked with a lot of true cases. And I'd say very rare that people end up being around or hearing about a case of child sexual abuse, except in the news. And it's one of the worst things that could happen to anybody. Children are vulnerable. This is a terrible thing. But it happens a small percent. It happens more than people think, but it's still a small percent. And so when it's been false, I've had a real uphill sometimes with people. I have one client who medically treated their child's genitals because of some bed bugs and such, bites. And the other parent said that's child sexual abuse. Well, the criminal code defines sexual abuse very specifically and says, and that it's not child sexual abuse when applying medically prescribed treatments. And it's like, this needs to be read out loud because this person, my client, did not abuse the child. They didn't get excited by it. Child didn't get excited. They just took care of a problem. And so that was where it's like, I know it's hard to believe, but this turns out the evidence shows this is what's happening, not what you jump to the conclusion of.
Yeah, so it's a matter of, I guess the key takeaways here would be really listen, be objective, be matter of fact, look for evidence, right? When someone's bringing a claim of some kind, don't be just dismissive or think that this person is histrionic or high conflict just because they're raising the issue. But do be objective and listen and do your own due diligence. If something feels off, you'll probably find it. And if you don't, and there's still kind of a question mark, talk to someone you trust and bounce it off of them. But so let's say in one last question here, Bill, in a legal case, how would an attorney adjust their strategy once they recognize high conflict dynamics in a case? And there are a lot of attorneys who have had some, training around high conflict, but maybe not high conflict personalities, and understand that core personality that is driving every emotion, every decision, every, just informing everything and causing the disruption. So now you kind of get it. How can you adjust your strategy?
Well, I would say presenting in court is saying, I understand in a high conflict case that the court has to consider at least 3 theories of the case. There's allegations of bad behavior. One theory is it's true, and you've got to consider that and look into that. Second theory is it's not true at all, and the person making the allegations is acting badly. And the third theory is that both are acting badly fairly equally. In this case, Your Honor, it's the first or it's the second, and I will be able to explain in detail why that is. Even though it may seem surprising, the facts really show us that the behavior here is really quite different from what was presented on the surface. And here's my 3 biggest concerns, and here's examples of my 3 biggest concerns. And now I'll go into my full case presentation. So I would get it up front that this is something that you're going to have to think harder about. This isn't what it looks like on the surface. And one of the stories you're going to hear today is true, and one of them is completely false. And you're going to have to figure out which one. But I would like to suggest that it's our story, because we really can back it up with facts, whereas the other side's going to back it up with a lot of emotion and bluster. And don't be deceived by that. The facts tell us what's really going on here. And let me begin.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, good. Okay. Well, I guess the bottom line, you just have to remind yourself, if you're involved in a situation like this, to just stay reasonable. And you have to, even when you feel really frustrated, take that frustration in a different direction and put it on pause, go to the gym or something before you write that nasty email, or before you lose your cool and scream and yell at someone. So we wish everyone the best in these situations. Thank you for listening today. You'll find the links to all of our classes and training. And on the professional side, we do have several recorded trainings of you, Bill, speaking about handling high conflict cases, different personality types involved. And we have a really great online training. I think it's only 30 minutes long, about writing for court, where you talk about how to put those themes up front and that. So we'll put those links in the show note, along with a lot of the books and classes. If you're looking for training or consultation about a high conflict situation for your organization, find us at highconflictinstitute.com. If you have a high conflict situation in your personal life, visit us at conflictinfluencer.com. Keep learning and practicing skills. Be kind to yourself and to others, while we all try to keep the conflict small and find the missing piece. It's All Your Fault is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Wolf Samuels, John Coggins, and Ziv Moran. Find the show notes, and transcripts at truestory.fm or highconflictinstitute.com/podcast. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.